Hi, everyone. I'm Rob May. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Neurometric.
And I'm Ryan Eppley, co-founder and CEO of Root Access.
And this is the AI in NYC show. Today's show is our end of the year wrap up. And we have a very special guest on today, Jason Hiner, who is the editor-in-chief and chief content officer at DeepSeek. He'll DeepSeek. The Deep View. We're going to talk about DeepSeek, but he is not at DeepSeek. He is at the Deep View, and he'll explain what that is. But it's an AI-related publication, and we're going to have him walk us through some of the key AI stories that happened this year. So, Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here. It's fun. I'm glad you guys are doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go all into the craziness of the AI saga through your eyes, love to hear, how do you even get into becoming the chief content officer, the editor-in-chief? You know, you have a lot of chiefdom, but it really comes down to, you've been writing on technology for quite some time now.
Yeah, for a couple decades, writing about covering the technology industry at multiple publications. So leading publications, ZDNet most recently, and for that CNET and Tech Republic. So writing a lot about the business of technology has been most of my career, with a few exceptions. But when I looked at what was happening in the last couple years, one of the things that was really important to me, my thesis of where media is going, there's a lot of disruption happening in media. So my thesis about where it was going is it's going to be about deeper engagements with more specific audiences and a lot less about SEO. You know, SEO, Google has driven the media industry for a couple decades, right? It's no secret. And in the last couple years, like, that's changed a lot, and people's habits are changing, really even before AI, but especially since AI. You know, AI overviews are making it so that, you know, zero-click search, like, people go to search, they don't actually click on sites like the ones that I've been working on, right? So business model under attack for sure. And so I really wanted to work on that. And I also saw what's been happening in AI in ZDNet. When we relaunched in 2022, when I went to ZDNet, we did this brand relaunch, the biggest one in 30 years. And when we did that, we changed the brand, we changed the team, we changed the mission, and we created the ZDNet for the next decade in 2022. And when we did it, I said, at the time, within 3 years, AI is gonna be our #1 topic. And at the time, it was our 22nd most popular topic in 2022. And then 3 months later, ChatGPT launched, right? And so by January 2023, so less than 6 months later, it was our #1 topic. And so ZDNet was on this journey covering AI. And the more that I did that, the more I sort of got excited about, like, there's a lot of really interesting things happening. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of, you know, challenges, but where there's a lot of disruption, confusion, like, there's great work to do as journalists, a lot of, you know, fun questions to ask and ways to kind of help the audience. And so when I got the opportunity came looking for me, not me looking for the opportunity, with the Deep View. It's best known for its newsletter, and it covers AI, you know, exclusively. But the founder really has this vision of not just being an AI publication, but, you know, AI may eventually become like electricity or the cloud. You know, the Deep View is a brand that's just going to help people understand, you know, where technology is going ultimately. It's AI today, and the longer term, you know, who knows what it'll be. Yeah. AGI or who knows.
And what is the special sauce? What do you feel like Deep View does that's different from a lot of the other AI publications out there?
Yeah, there's a lot out there. It's true. So what I love about the Deep View is really playing the long game. It's about quality. It's about analysis. It's not about fluffing up all of the, you know, things that all of the AI companies are doing. It's really about bringing that level of filter and analytical viewpoint, critical thinking about these things. And so, you know, we tell it like it is. We try to sort the wheat from the chaff. And so I love that. That's like mostly I've built my career on that, of like, we won't always break the news, right? Breaking the news has some value, but we want to be the place that when the news happens, you know, people say, like, I want to hear what they have to say about it, because they always have really smart takes on this stuff.
Cool. Why don't we get started? Take us a little bit through, we put together a timeline here of key AI events that happened in 2025 as we're wrapping up the year. Why don't you take us through some of the key events starting in the beginning of the year, and we can talk about the significance of those, what was most impressive, all that kind of stuff.
Wind us back, January of this year, January 2025.
Seems like forever ago.
Ooh, yeah. What a lifetime ago, for sure. Well, that was the DeepSeek moment, of course, right? So DeepSeek came out. It was this open source, open weight model that had trained on a fraction of the resources that these other frontier models had. And it really was the beginning of something that would unfold through the rest of the year, which is that, like, you know, maybe the future isn't these gigantic smart models, one model to rule them all, because it's so expensive. And the frontier models, you know, have a certain perspective. And that thesis has only continued to sort of, you know, propel us throughout the year. But DeepSeek itself, coming from China, trained on lesser hardware, trained on a lot less money, that really put the industry, you know, on its heels a little bit to start the year. What was your all's perspective on
What I thought was most interesting about it actually was the fact that, so for people that don't know how programming stacks work, right, there's different layers, right? There's like binary code, and there's like assembler code, and then there's, you know, these languages like C and C++, and you come up to Python, and the difference between these layers of code is how abstracted everything is below it, right? How much does something else take care of that? And how much do you, like when you write C code, you have to understand the hardware and what you're doing. And DeepSeek, one of the things about it was, everybody hears about CUDA, and CUDA is the moat for NVIDIA. Yep. Which is the software that helps you get your machine learning model onto the GPU. Well, there's a lower level language that CUDA, that interacts with CUDA, which is kind of like assembly language, and it's called PTX. And one of the things I found interesting was that the DeepSeek team worked at the PTX level to optimize a bunch of stuff. And that was pretty cool. And it showed you I mean, it just shows how unoptimized the AI industry is today, right? Everybody's chasing the next big thing. Everybody's chasing sort of top of mind capabilities. Yeah. And so I think one of the things that you'll see, and we'll talk about this later in the show, in like 2026 and 27, is there'll be about the years of optimization and all that. But I mean, it's supposed to be interesting to you. You kind of work at this lower level of software programming.
Well, it's interesting because you took such a like technology lens on this. I think for me, because, you know, I have a lot of friends that work in either defense or their international relations. So the geopolitics to me was actually more of an exciting kind of moment with the DeepSeek drop. It was, I had a lot of friends kind of like, you know, texting each other on Signal, like, hey, are you checking out DeepSeek? And it was like this weird thing of like, yeah, but like I can't let people know I am, right? Because like, you know, America first, AI here in the States. And I thought a lot of people either took a stance of, no, I'm not trying it. You know, that's like unpatriotic to try DeepSeek. And a lot of people saying, hey, like look at their technological like prowess and their cleverness. They don't have the same resources. They've been literally barred from having it through, you know, export controls and things like that. But I mean, wow, it's spending a ton less energy to do some great output, you know? And so I think for me, it was more of, it just showed us, even though everyone thinks that they've solved so much within AI already, it is literally inning 1 and 2 yet, right? So there's still so much innovation to be done on the technological side. For me, I think it was more of a wake-up call on maybe we're not as ahead as a nation as we thought we were. And then obviously there's more things that happen through the year as a reflection of that moment. But I think government woke up very quickly to, wow, DeepSeek is incredibly effective. What are we going to do about that now?
They kind of whipsawed, right? They kind of initially said, well, we got to ban the high-end chips from places like China so they can't work on them. And then they kind of came back around and were like, well, no, we've changed our mind. In the fall, we want them dependent on us and not developing their own and pushing forward on their own. I think they're, we've talked about this, I think, on the show at some point, this idea that like mobile phones in Africa, because they didn't have landlines, they got much faster adoption. And so you always risk, if you cut somebody off of a layer of technology when there's a discontinuity and there's a new jump to a new layer of technology, sometimes they'll jump ahead of you just because of that they don't have a legacy infrastructure to contend with. So it's been interesting to watch. Like nobody really knows what to do or where stuff is going. So the whipsawing's been interesting.
So did you write about any of the technological innovation on DeepSeek? Did you do much of the reporting on like the geopolitics behind it? Like what was like kind of your take as the editor, but also just maybe some of the writing room?
Sure. So we wrote about it from both the politics and but less the politics, but more, the China-US race is always a thing, the technology race part of it, less the politics. But we also wrote about it from the technological, part of it. And one of the things that was really interesting to me is I remember talking to a large nonprofit in the US, and they very quickly sort of banned all of their, they have some geopolitical concerns, and they banned everyone, in the organization from using DeepSeek because they were concerned about, there's the real concern about China, from a cybersecurity standpoint, and that was not something I expected. So that was really interesting. And yeah, I think that DeepSeek, this point that Rob mentioned of like the fact that they found and had to find a way to do it more efficiently, really started a boulder rolling down the hill that I think has continued to, gain steam throughout the year. And I expect to be a much bigger story in 26 because, we had this this connected later with a thing with Stanford study. No, it was MIT. The MIT study that 95% of people deploying AI weren't making, enterprises were not making profitable deployments with it. That narrative, I think, is going to carry into the year of like, okay, these things, we have to make this cost a lot less for it to work for us.
Yeah.
That was DeepSeek, right? So that's January. Start off the year with a bang. Lots of opinions flying around both on the technology itself and, are you anti-American if you're into DeepSeek? And a lot of VCs were playing that game of, oh, you back them. Are you allowed to back them? Is that okay? And, I think Founders Fund came out very, very aggressively saying like, hey, it's not a good idea to do that, for each his opinion. But then what happened next? What was like the big next moment within this trilogy of the year?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to say like the OpenAI's, O1, the reasoning model. I think that was a little bit unexpected too. And I think also the industry was, and the people involved, with AI, were trying to understand what is it? How is it different? When should we use it? I remember you and I talking, Rob, and you saying like it was for your company, like the founding of your company, like it was like a seminal moment. Like when you saw it happen, it was like, oh, there's really something here to really unpack and do something with.
Yeah, and it was the 03 version of that launched in 2025.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
They had an early version of it at the end of last year.
But it was the first but it was the first
reasoning
that worked well.
That people could do stuff. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because it's for like the people listening that don't understand some of these terms, there's a whole bunch of terms: post-training, test time scaling, test time compute, all these things that they call it, inference time compute, which is basically like once the model is trained and done, what else can you do to the model to make it perform better? And it turns out there are a lot of algorithms that they can control how you probe the model, how you ask it questions, what you do to it. I mean, this is what my company's built around, so I know a lot about the space.
Yeah.
But it's a growing space, and it's the way, when you hear about chain of thought and beam search and these technologies, these are the ways that you get more out of the model. You can get more out of bigger models, you can get more out of smaller models. And so I think everybody went, wow, I agree with you, Jason. Like, this is early stuff. We're going to see a lot more of this because people are just... My friends at the frontier model labs still believe pre-training has so much further to go, just more data, synthetic data, new techniques and everything else. But this, the inference time side of stuff is gonna be a big story in 2026 and 27.
Inference and inference and for the audience, inference is when you're asking the model questions,
when you're interacting with it,
versus training is when you're sort of building the model to before you send it out.
And it used to be, I don't remember the exact stats, but there was something up until last year, it was 60-70% of GPUs were used for training, right? Making these big models. But now with the explosion of AI actually put into production, it's going to become 80% inference. And so optimizing inference to make it cheap and efficient and cost effective and reduce the power and all that is going to become a big issue.
And it's something that now that you mention in that kind of statistic, we talk about, New York City as like the applied AI capital.
Yeah.
It's almost such a moment where when people talk about the bubble or not, seeing the difference of every resource is going into just training and getting them ready to, oh, wow, people are using these now. I thought when OpenAI's, O3 kind of dropped, like people that I've known for years that are not technologists at all were like, hey, this is incredibly helpful for me at work now.
Yeah.
Right? Because I felt like it was making it more of a layman's onboarding, right? You didn't have to have like this be a code generation tool anymore. This was like, hey, like I'm going to dump in a file for you of any sort. It could be a financial report. It could be like a 20-page kind of, quarterly earnings. Like it could be almost anything. And people are like, yeah, this gave me a ton of insights that I'd otherwise send to like my associate to go read.
Well, this ties back into, one of the things we've talked about off and on the show, right, is like, are we in a bubble? And one of the things that I think is happening is like when you think about O3 and the time it can save you, like you give it a list of something, right? Restaurants, people, venture firms, like whatever, and you ask it a question, go off and do a research on this list, come back with these things. It's pretty good. It might not always be 100%, but it's pretty good. And it's gotten better since the O3 launch in April.
Yeah.
And when you think about the time that can save and how that compiles to the economy, like, of course we're not seeing that. I don't know why people expect that we're like, there's these innovations and 6 weeks later they're in the productivity statistics, right? Like, how about 3 years later they're in the productivity statistics? But a lot of people don't know how to use it, but like we're getting there and these things are really, really powerful.
And then deep research around the same time. So we started seeing deep research, released too. And that is, I think what the significance of that partly is for people, for the broad spectrum of people using, AI, it's their first taste of what AI agents will be. Where you're like, go off and do this thing for me, and then I'll come back, later. Like, because it can take, deep research can take 5 minutes, sometimes. Sometimes, I guess I've heard it could take up to 25 minutes. I've never given it anything that's taken up to 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Mostly it'll take 2 minutes, but, it can do things for you. I had this amazing example of it at one point in this year. Somebody was texting my son, asking him about a job, and it was this company that he'd never heard of. And so he texts me, and he's like, "Have you ever heard it?" Because it's a tech company. He's like, "Have you ever heard of this company? Like, are they for real?" And I was like, in the middle of a string of meetings, I was like, "Look, I'm in a string of meetings right now." But so I sent it to Claude Deep Research. I said, "Let me check. Let me do a query." Send it to Claude Deep Research, ask it like, what is it rated? How many job listings do they have? What can you tell? Is the company legit? How are they regarded? And it came back with an amazing set of things. It was about 5 minutes or whatever. It was by the time, and I had a break in the meeting, went, checked, got it, sent it to him. And I was like, looks pretty real. They had all the citations, like this many job listings. Here's what on Glassdoor, it's listed, this. And it was a great example of like, okay, this is what AI agents are going to be like. You're going to be able to just give it a thing, go work on it, then you come back to it, and then you can send that off, that workload or that workflow to somebody.
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
Oh, that's cool. So that takes us to July. We had a new event to put a new company on the map.
Boy, yeah, this is where, so Grok 4 came out. So XAI, Grok 4 came out. And that was sort of the watershed moment where Grok 4 went from this like funny little side project to like, oh, this is a true frontier lab.
Yeah,
like
it won on some of the benchmarks when it came out.
It did. It did. It was beating Google. It was beating Google, OpenAI, and Anthropic on some benchmarks. And so all of a sudden it was like, okay, this thing's pretty real, and it's good at a specific set of things, I think, too. So because it's trained on XAI is from X, Elon Musk and his companies. It has all that Twitter data, and that's a lot of data, a lot of real-time data. So I think of Grok as similar to like Perplexity. If you want something that's more like real-time, super timely, I think Grok and Perplexity are the ones that have the best, the best stuff for that. At least the best front-end interface too, and Grok maybe the best data. So it suddenly became pretty real, and it's continued to be throughout the year too. Like 4.1 is still good. It's still up there on a lot of the benchmarks.
Yeah, and they did a lot of reinforcement learning with human feedback, I think, to make that model better. And so that was that was an interesting direction that sort of proved where RL could go. But it's going to be interesting to see how they monetize this, right? Because I've read some stories towards the end of the year that, Grok has this, or X.AI has this like perception of like, do you really want to advertise there? It's kind of a cesspool, certain areas of the, so I don't know.
It wasn't a seminal moment, but I think it was during the summer where it got extremely hot, no pun intended, with the time of the year when it was all about stealing talent from each other.
Yeah.
Right. This is right when you started seeing posters and flyers about people getting like poached from each other's like, super intelligent labs and things like that. I just vividly remember it was like right around this moment where, Grok 4 comes online. Everyone's beating the drum about we're getting the most talented people doing, in Meta's cases, like sometimes $100 million pay packages, which is outrageous, right?
Yeah.
Looking like, starting quarterbacks for a franchise. How did you all report on the talent wars? Because that was obviously a big moment, and it continued, but it really felt like it took off this year.
For sure. In the summer, I think that there became a point where there really was an arms race for these things. Like you look at those developments in the first half of the year with DeepSeek, OpenAI, and Grok, a lot of those were at that sort of model training, level. And it was becoming clear if you were, even around the same time, but it was mostly in the US and OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google game. And Google was considered a trail, they were trailing at this point, right? Like they were sometimes a little bit of a joke. Like they would release a model and mostly people would laugh at the things that it was doing.
Yeah.
But they were still considered, one of the big three. And so if you were OpenAI, or sorry, if you weren't one of those three, if you were XAI, or you were
the straw,
Meta,
or you were Meta,
you felt like it, and it looked and felt like you were really behind, and Apple too, right? And Apple sort of gave up the race. It felt like you probably weren't going to get there, and so Mark Zuckerberg definitely feeling that is like, okay, forget it. We're going to go and hire all the best. Do what we can to hire all the best people, right? And they made this crazy move to go out and just keep people tons of money. Interestingly, I've heard Anthropic CEO say that there were people on their team that got gigantic offers and didn't leave because they refused to match offers. They really were saying like, no, we're gonna keep, we're not gonna let this ruin our pay scales and
you have to think about the kinds of people that work on cutting edge AI. Like they want to be paid well for what they know. They don't want to these people spend their weekends working on AI, right? Trying new stuff. Like the difference to them between making $2 or $3 million a year at Google and 20 or 30 or $50 million, it doesn't affect their lives very much.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who was on Zuck's call list, who works at Google, and his whole thing was like, yes, I got a better offer than what I make at Google, like much better, but I don't believe that Meta is as serious about AI and where it's going to go as Google is. So I want to stay here because he believes Google will be the place that cracks AGI, and he wants to be there when it happens. And that's more, he feels like he's compensated fine, and that latter piece that's more important to him.
Yeah. Once your bills are paid, it's not going to have that much of an impact on their life, right? If he's well compensated, a lot of these folks are well compensated. The ones who left probably were like, okay, I want to do this for a little while, and then maybe I can go do that startup I wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
After
fund it myself with my 9-figure paycheck.
Exactly.
I've been seeing a lot of even Series B, Series C startups starting to be aggressively outbound in public talking about their acqui-hire strategies. Obviously, acqui-hire has been around forever, right? Yeah. It's kind of the easiest way to say you had an exit without it being like a big financial return. It happened, but it wasn't publicized. Now I see founders saying, hey, we raised $100, $200 million, and we're going to go buy 3 to 4 companies that aren't trying to sell, but we just want their talent. I think this whole talent wars has been healthy in a lot of ways, but it's also been kind of distracting because it's really hard to build long-term success if you're continually switching people out of the locker room. It's hard to build a long-term, winning team. And so I've been curious personally as I build a team of how dedicated are people to the long-term vision of a company? I don't know if you've spent a lot of time thinking through the challenges of the talent war and the effects this will have and the ripples it will. But yeah, I think the talent wars is, as we get through, Grok 4 into like the late summer, probably a moment that in 2025 will always be a defining moment for this AI race is the talent war itself.
When sort of these huge checks started getting written for AI, engineers and sort of the downstream effects.
And then marketing it, oh, we're paying this much for this person.
Yeah.
It was like a marketing, opportunity more than it was like actually talent.
Patrick Mahomes now wishes he was a computer science
Right,
major.
right.
So, well, I mean, but it kind of ties into our next point about GPT-5, right? And like they kind of like, I wouldn't say it was a flop, but it was disappointing. And does that have to do with the talent, the brain drain that they had?
You remember that they lost, so GPT-5, when OpenAI released GPT-5, there was not the big leap forward we'd seen with their 3 and 4 and even like 3.5. And so there was this big question of like, well, what happened, why, and what was going on? And it was very clear in one sense because their two lead, tech of the tech team had left, Murati and Ilya Sutskever. And so it was kind of like, oh, did they not have the goods, to deliver? I think that narrative is probably a little over.
When you can raise $2 billion on 10, maybe you can go start your own company.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot those two went and raised, billions based on a couple blog posts, right? Which is pretty amazing. So, but they still have a lot of talent at OpenAI for sure. But yeah, but it really did bring up that question of like, okay, maybe did they release it too soon? Do they not have, the talent? Did they not know that it was?
Well, I think there's a lot of pressure on the recruiting side to be at the place that has the best models and is doing the best research, right? And then it's compounded at OpenAI. Like, Anthropic has a different business model. They're more enterprise focused. They're closer to cash flow break even and all that. Yeah. So they don't have the burn problems OpenAI has. And then Google has a couple of cash cow businesses, so they don't have that. So OpenAI is really in a unique position.
Yeah, and maybe we can get like a graphic up here at some point, but like when all of the different companies were starting to partner with each other, specifically OpenAI, right? You had the Oracle deal. Oh yeah. Now you have the Amazon deal,
Hasn't worked out well for Oracle though, man. That stock's way down since the announcement.
It's been super, super interesting. Just like, I have to imagine you were all over this kind of backdoorsy, where is the money actually parked and where is it going and what does the deal mean? I've spent a lot of time trying to work through the cobwebs. What do these $100 billion deals actually mean? Is it marketing? Is it actual long-term kind of like shareholder value creation? Like, how have you seen these massive deals that just seem kind of like a web right now?
Yeah, and so I guess that's as we get to sort of the second half of the year, we start seeing OpenAI signing these huge deals, partnership deals. Oracle, obviously the Microsoft, they had to up their Microsoft deal. Now Amazon recently, but they've done others. NVIDIA,
NVIDIA invested $100 billion or whatever.
Yeah, that was massive, right? So I think some of this, and circular financing comes up a lot, right? Because it's kind of like, I will invest $100 billion in you and you commit to buying, 90 billion of my, so it's sort of like, is any money actually, transferring? Yeah. I think some of it comes to the fact that, it's tough for them to be a private company. They're getting to a scale that it's really hard for them to be a private company. There's not $90 billion sitting around in a whole lot of banks, right, to be able to move. And so, but when you are a publicly traded company, then those kind of numbers, you can move around a lot more, like with stock.
The public
and
would love to own a slog of OpenAI. I don't know why they don't IPO sooner.
I think there's like a lot of things that they're still sorting out for their S1. I think their S1 is going to be very interesting to read.
Their financials are probably terrible.
Right. That was my nice way of saying that.
Yes.
I don't know if they're terrible.
But don't you think the Robin Hood Gen Z millennial crowd would just like buy that, like just?
It's got meme stock written all over it.
Yeah, it does.
Right? Like
it's Wall Street bets, baby, on Reddit. It's just
I could also see it going like the antithesis direction. I can see a lot of people going against them.
Shorting it.
I would short it, and I think that's what you'd get. You get a lot of people short it. Yeah, we had on an earlier episode. I shorted Oracle for about 6 weeks based on the OpenAI deal. And my thesis was that there would be a time when OpenAI announced they were struggling to fundraise, and Oracle would be the company most impacted by that.
Yeah.
So
Because I still don't understand like Stargate. Like I still am like still trying to figure out what that private-public partnership at the largest level really means, because that's right in the mix of this whole like, you know, interconnected web as well. You know, break it down for us. What is Stargate?
Stargate. So Stargate is this project with the U.S. government, you know, OpenAI, Oracle, U.S. government. Am I remembering that also SoftBank is part of this too? So the interesting thing, and they are building a massive data center.
$500 billion.
$500 billion data center. They don't even call it a data center anymore. They call it an AI factory, which is essentially like 7 data centers, right next to each other. It's an AI, it's a marketing term, right? Like it's like AGI. It's a marketing term.
If we've all played like Civilization enough, like a new piece of the tech tree has just opened, an AI factory, right? Like we just unlocked AI factory, right?
Yes. Totally. So they are building a physical thing in Texas which seems an odd one. Like cooling is a big thing. So like, why would you put it in Texas?
Put it in Montana.
Exactly. Put it in the coldest place you can find, Alaska or something. I don't know. But you need good internet, I guess. So the interesting thing is they are building this, big time. And they're doing it at a scale which has not really been seen before, right? Building data centers at scales that haven't been seen before, but they started doing that, and that was earlier in the year. They've built bunches of it already, and it has a lot further to go. But and then you saw, Amazon and Microsoft and other in Indiana, just north of where I am. There are essentially 7 projects from Amazon, Anthropic, Microsoft, OpenAI built all throughout there. It's a little colder, so maybe that's why. But it's these projects, and then Atlanta is another place where there's a bunch being built. I have a friend that works in tech, and his whole neighborhood went in and were sort of doing a petition against this being built because they didn't want their power costs to rise, because that's been happening in places where these are being built. So the data center boom is also one of the huge stories, especially as we've gotten to the second half of the year.
Yeah, we had a whole discussion a couple of shows ago about how the used jet engines are turning into power devices for data centers. I mean, it's crazy what's going on in that space.
EV batteries too. EV battery, the demand for EVs hasn't turned into what was expected. And so you saw Ford announce that they were like the F-150, they were going to end production, and instead of like stopping production of the batteries, they're going to sell them to data centers.
Yeah. But it's interesting to see the density of these things as Moore's law has caused us to not be able to grow chip density the way we would like. You're starting to see it at higher levels of abstraction, right? So now you're talking about more chips per board, more boards per server, more servers per rack, more racks per row in a data center, and they're figuring out ways to do that. And NVIDIA's had a lot of foresight in with the Mellanox acquisition and some of these other things, sort of acquiring the networking, high bandwidth, capabilities to connect these things.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a big trend. I think 2025 sort of laid the ground for that. And I think the sort of memory and networking components will be a big thing to watch in 2026 for how these data centers scale, the effect of like flops of AI.
Yeah. I wonder too, probably the audience I wonder, people in the audience probably wonder, why do we need all these data centers, right? And so I think some of it comes down to these companies like OpenAI, NVIDIA, Oracle, Microsoft, Amazon, they look and they see that, only about 13% of the population in the world use generative AI today, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at that over the next few years, like the growth curve is going to be pretty steep.
Yeah.
And then the people that even use it, a big percentage of those 13%, all they've done is just their first few queries, right? Asking a simple question that they would have asked Google, right, a few years ago. And the more people use it, they tend to use it more and more and more. And then when you factor in things like AI agents, deep research, and you start using it for some of those things, all of a sudden that's where, what we talk about inference comes in, and the demand for inference is likely to spike just enormously. And so today's computers today's data centers, they could not handle, that kind of demand.
Yeah. Did you guys see the Micron announcement yesterday? So the day we're shooting the show, the night before, Micron announced like I mean, they blew their numbers out of the water selling DRAM to companies on the AI side.
Every person that builds computers like me in their home is like, oh man, I no longer can afford that. Like, that's way too expensive. I can't compete with, the likes of enterprises.
But it shows like what's interesting is, you have the Michael Burrys of the world and these guys that are like, oh, this doesn't make sense and we can't justify it. But when you talk to the people that are in it, doing it, they're like, the demand is so strong for so far that we can see. Like they're the Microns of the world, the Microsofts, the people buying data centers, the Googles, they're all in. And to look at Burry's memo, like Google's basically like our TPU V1 is still 100% utilization, like 7 years, 8, 9 years, however old it is, like they're still using it as much as they can go. And I think that's, it doesn't necessarily mean we're not in a bubble because it's hard to, there's still a lot of uncertainty around how you monetize these things and what they're worth and how efficient and productive it is. But in terms of demand, the demand is there and not going away. And everybody believes that.
I mean, if we were sitting in 1780s, 1790s going into the turn of the century, like we'd all invest in like railroads, right? Like that's a technology revolution. And I think we're in the midst of it right now. So whether there is a bumpiness, like every revolution over time, like, I think the investments that when we get to this like fall period and the Stargate's really starting to take effect and there's a lot of dirt being moved for these AI factories now, I think it's very real, and I think your team's definitely written on, bubble versus real, We always ask every guest, right? Like bubble, not bubble, like what's your take? You obviously heard, Rob's input. What do you feel?
I do still, NVIDIA says that it has a 12-month backlog, right? Like if they stopped, if they didn't take any more orders today,
they would hit their 2026 number.
They already had 2026 taken care of, right? So I think that does speak to the level of demand in this growth curve that we're still at the very beginning of. The number one reason I don't think we're in a bubble with a capital B is because everybody's talking about it. Bubbles sneak up on you. Bubbles are like in the, I was covering the .com bubble. I covered the 2010 to 2012, bubble. At those times, everybody was like, it's all up and to the right as far as we can see for, forever. And now so we sort of just talked a little bit about that, but at the time, nobody was talking bubble. They're like, it's just all up and to the right. And one of the things that just structurally, bubbles are usually, involve the markets, right? Where the markets are just like, that typically happens when bulls they just run with it. Yeah. And then, they drive the price of everything up so high.
But these are private markets.
These are private
with
markets.
Very smart investors. Doesn't mean that they always are right.
That's
but
right.
They do a lot of care and research.
So I don't think there's a capital B bubble because usually one of the things that a smart sort of finance person told me is like bubbles happen when the shorts give up, like they can't understand the market, and so they don't short anything, because then the bears take off, right, and drive the price of everything up. There's a lot of shorts that are shorting all kinds of things right now, right? So when you start seeing like people who short, like Burry and that sort of like give up because they can't understand what's happening, that's trouble. But right now, when there are a lot of people that think we're in a bubble, we probably aren't in a bubble because they're still in the game. That said, I do think there are small bubbles, just like there were, in the past. There's a lot of cash that's been deployed by VCs over the past couple of years. Like not all those bets are going to pay off. The data center thing is really, I think there's a lot of money being spent on that, and the circular financing of it puts a lot of that circular financing is really bet on sentiment. If OpenAI loses sort of sentiment that it's not as worth, or that as much as everybody thought, or that it doesn't have this strong up to the right trajectory, some of that house of cards will start to fall, and you could see some ripples from that. So there's likely to be some backlash, here and there, but I don't think it's a capital B bubble like the .com, crash, or even the 2010. Mortgage crash.
So let's talk about sort of our last story of the year from last month, November. Google launched Gemini 3, kind of took back the crown on the model side pretty convincingly. And not just that, but like the narrative shifted from this summer. The narrative was ChatGPT is going to eat into their search business. Google's toast. Like, what are they going to do? To now, like, Wall Street's like, Google is the best positioned and most vertically integrated to take advantage of AI. And the stock's like on a tear since the late summer.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were your thoughts on that? How'd you guys cover it? What do you think about Google going forward?
I don't think I've ever seen a narrative like change so drastically, so rapidly, which is really, really interesting. I think some of the underlying realities are still the same, despite the narrative changing, which is that, Google is this big sprawling company that does a lot of things. And so the reason that it got behind in the generative AI revolution, even though it created the transformer, right? Like it created the technology that underlies LLMs, was because it still does a lot of different things, right? So it's easy to lose focus. When you have a company that does like, this is what we do, this is all we think about every day, this is our jam. They tend to, outrun big giants. And so they had lost some of that. Clearly they've got some of their mojo back. I think the part of that though is the fact that they took the DeepMind team that was in London, just working on AGI essentially over there, and sort of pointed them toward like, hey, you essentially built all of this stuff, like, build us a model that's really good. And I think my understanding is that's what's really driven them to this breakthrough. And if that continues to be the case, I think they are the one that, the reason they bought DeepMind, the reason DeepMind agreed to be bought by Google was simply because of compute. They had the access to more compute than anybody else. That's still true. So that's what I mean about like the reality is still the same, that Google still has more access to compute.
And that's accelerating. Now they have their own TPUs. They keep getting more advanced. They're just, And
so that's what all those deals that OpenAI is out there trying to sign is they're trying to get more compute, right? Google doesn't have to go and sign those deals because they already have it.
Yeah.
That puts them in a great, to your point, ultimately, that puts them in a pretty amazing place to be. Not a great, not a sort of unbreachable moat or something, but it is a strong position.
And as they move forward, when you think about where AI is going, multimodal models, world models, world models that are based on physics are often trained on video. Who has the largest cache of video in the world? It's YouTube.
Right.
So they have a lot of unique assets.
The world models, like they have, Google Maps.
Yeah.
Right? They spend so much time building that out, right?
Their TPUs are on V7. They're very efficient now. And one of the things that Jason and I were talking about earlier is actually this idea that, these you have all these new AI accelerators that are GPU competitors. Samba Nova, you have TPUs from Google, you have Trainium from Amazon, you have Grok with a Q. There's a bunch of these chips, and so they've all struggled, like we talked about from Doug O'Loughlin, right, at SemiAnalysis, because of the software stack to get your models onto these chips. With Trainium and TPUs going and working with these big companies, that is going to ease a little bit, right? People are going to get used to thinking about different accelerators and what they should use them for, and so that could be a really big story in 2026.
Yeah, my whole thing about Google is if you are, call it 30 to 40, right, you still have another 20 to 30 years of your like kind of prime-ish career.
Yeah.
I would argue that Google is the most trusted brand, at least in America, for that age group.
Yeah.
It's
30 to 40. Yeah.
Because like I'm 32 and like when I think about a company that most of my friends would automatically like click the button to try something or go ahead and like do the new feature, it's probably like, oh yeah, I've trust Gmail. Yeah, I've Googled since I was like in my computer lab in elementary school. Like
the brand is "Don't be evil," even though that's not really
right. Well,
same
again,
anymore,
marketing is very important.
Yeah.
But I feel like
They
Google
struck that from the
the brand positioning aspect, they are going to get all the people in the middle of their career right now, which are decision makers enough. They might not be the VP of enterprise companies, but they will be in 15 years from now.
Yeah.
But they are engineering managers. They're the managers on the marketing team. They're like doing the CFA work, and they have enough sway and decision-making power, but they're young enough that they're still looked to as, oh, we're trying out a new technology in our company. You seem like someone that's like young and hip to this. And you're like, dude, I'm like in my 30s. Like I'm not like a 19-year-old anymore, but you still have that youngness to you, but you can make decisions. And I feel like Google is just the right time for this decision maker to onboard new tools. They're going to trust Google more than a new tool in a lot of ways.
Well, I think AI has been Google's phase 2 moment. So you're old enough that you probably remember when Microsoft was the cool kid. And then from like 2007 to like 2013, 14, people were like, why would you ever go to work at Microsoft? Like that company's going to go out of business. And then Nadella came in and really did a great turnaround there.
He did.
And then it became, Google became the like, why would you go work? It was the place to work in the early 2000s. Then sort of like 2017, 18, 19, you're like, why would you go to Google? Now I think that's come back. So maybe it's Meta now, right? So now Meta's in this like, wandering in the desert phase of like, what are we doing?
And the dark horse, of course, is Apple, who's like bowed out and people have left. But we all know like their balance sheet is too big to not get involved at some point.
What's going to happen with those? Meta, with Apple, with the ones we haven't heard a lot about. Like, where are they on the AI side?
Where are they? I know. So Apple, it's really interesting. What we've seen, the reporting that's been done is that they have had a lot of brain drain. Like this year, most of the people that were on, the ones driving a lot of the LLM strategy, a lot of their generative AI strategy, because they were going to try to do it on their own. Essentially, I think they wanted to become a frontier lab, right? You look even to the first half of 2025. I think they were still on the track, like we're going to be one of the frontier labs.
Yeah. And
they appear to have gotten off that train. That they've had a lot of the folks that were working on that have left. Have gone to. I've heard that a lot of that team now works at OpenAI. That was at Apple. That said, I think we are going to get to a point in 25 where, and Perplexity is a good example of this, where, the frontier model part is going to be a little bit commoditized. It's not going to be super valuable. It will continue to be super valuable. But I don't think you have to be there to be a big player in AI.
Yeah.
I think that you could be more at the, at the sort of application level of like integrating this and making it useful to people. And do a lot. I mean, Perplexity's done that really well. It is sort of the best AI search in a lot of ways for a lot of things. And I think Apple can they can partner with OpenAI or Anthropic or Google. The latest of the word is probably going to be Google. They will white box some Gemini, stuff and integrate it. But they can still do some great work and use it to make Siri better, use it to integrate directly into those sort of billions of people that have their devices. They've got the opportunity to do. It
seems so obvious that Siri would have been great by now, right? It's just shouldn't that be like the original AI agent?
Yes.
Right? I just, I feel like they lost out on that big time. But Apple's, they're going to do something impressive is my take in the next year or two. We'll see.
They're great at taking markets that are shaping up where people are doing stuff and like sitting back and watching and then coming in and being not the first company to do it, but the first company to do it right.
Yeah.
That's kind of their strength.
To make it obvious, to make the thing obvious to the way a person would use it and integrate it into their daily life, their daily workflow. They still have plenty of opportunity to do that. I think they need to do it, in the next couple of years, because we're seeing that 13% is going to turn into 25 probably pretty quickly. And they need to be in early enough that they can, be part of more people's lives.
Yeah, so the whole Gemini and Google kind of taking back the crown was a big moment, last month here in November. Is there anything that you are writing on now to end the year that you think is like something that is worth our audience hearing? Because it's not live, so they'll hear it in like a week from now, right? So is there anything that you're writing on right now that's coming out in the next week or two before the year ends that you're like, I think everyone should really take note of this when it drops?
Yeah, the year end is usually stuff goes pretty quiet, but I will say one for 26 that I think everybody, and we touched on it a little bit already. I think world models is going to be the AI agents of 2026. AI agents were like the buzz of 2025. I think world models could be that for 2026. AI agents will still be, because most people, if you ask them,
so
like,
early.
I was in a conference, and I asked, who uses an AI agent, and there's like, in a room of 100 people, there were like 4, right?
Yeah.
But I think when, 2 or 3 years from now, like everybody in that room will, and 5 years from now, probably all of them will have at least 5 working for them. But world models is the thing that I think is likely to get some of the buzz in 26 because, and they've said this, the next gen AI, whatever you call it, I don't love AGI as a term. Super intelligence, I like even less,
Yeah.
But I think what they're really trying to get at is like next level AI that doesn't hallucinate as much, that has more capabilities, that can operate a little bit more independently. And if you think about that, it's gonna need more than just language models, right? It's gonna need, like you guys were saying earlier, it's gonna need something that can understand, more multimodal inputs, video, audio, photos, mapping data, those kinds of things. And that's where I think world models could be the thing that really drives the next, level of innovation and the next leap forward.
Yeah, I mean, you've spoken a lot about world models. You have a similar take? Big next thing coming up in 2026?
I would broaden Jason's take a little bit and just say that, like, I think moving away from LLMs, right? So people forget there's all kinds of models that we still use, right?
Yeah.
People still use recurrent neural nets. They still use CNNs. There's still a lot of things other than transformer-based LLMs. State space models have gotten more popular this year, and so I think 2026 will be a year where you start to see world models. You start to see more usage of SLMs. I think you start to see some technologies that move away from transformer-based. There's a lot of hybrid models that have come out. IBM has a key one. Actually, I think, didn't Google launch something? I don't think we covered it here, but I think Google launched something that was Mamba plus transformer mix.
Right, yeah.
Google did a research paper last year on these recursive models, which is a cool idea. So there's a bunch of stuff floating around out there, and everybody's looking for an edge. And that's going to encourage some people to try these things. So I think 2026 will be a year when LLMs I think LLMs have been the thing that people associate with AI, and I think they'll become a thing. To your point earlier, we're still going to use the frontier models. They're still great when you're like, I don't know what to do with this. There's still use cases for it, but I think you're going to see, and I'm biased here because I run a company that, is based on this whole thesis. But I think you're going to see people fragment into using the right model for the right thing, multi-model systems. I think, when I look at companies on the AI maturity curve, everybody starts, they build a POC on a single model.
Yep.
Then they build, then they launch in production and they support Google and Anthropic or OpenAI and Anthropic. They have one they go to and then a backup. But as they get sophisticated and they see more data, they start to break out their workloads to more models. And then, the companies you see, I can't comment on because there's a lot of private discussions, but some publicly traded companies that are very AI sophisticated have, 42 different models in production that they use, some fine-tuned SLMs of their own, some frontier models, some older models like GPT-3. They know the right model for the right task. And that's where everybody's going to go over time, because this whole industry has to get more efficient, to your point earlier in the conversation.
I see this a lot. Obviously, you all when the deep view covered, the leaderboard that you and your team did. But that conversation was one of like a bunch of conversations that I had with people working on this idea from different vantage points, that as enterprises start to use AI and start to use these models to really drive efficiencies, to drive new gains, new innovations in the enterprise, they come across this problem, which is that inference is really expensive. And so they're like, how do we take this and do it, but let's do it for 1/10 of the cost? And it comes down to, we have to use more specialized models, or we have to do caching, or we have to do other things, but we can't just run everything on sort of the frontier model on the cutting edge hardware, because all that gets really expensive really fast, and we start paying a lot of token costs essentially, and other costs. So I see this as one of the things that's going to happen a lot next year too. 26, I would say, using sort of the best model for the job isn't always going to be the frontier model. I mean, we've seen, there's been some reports just in the past month that there's a lot of US companies that are building on DeepSeek and Qwen because they're open source, open weight models, and they're a lot less expensive, to run. But even on running on older models, running on older hardware, there are a lot of workloads that don't necessarily need to run on those super expensive models. So you can do it for cheaper and get better performance in some cases, which is like incredible.
So before we jump to our New York question that we always ask, let's end on one more AI question, which is, what do you guys think is the most overhyped thing in AI in 2025? Like who's the faker that's going to be exposed in 2026, or what's the story where you're like, everybody made a big deal about that, but it wasn't a big deal?
I know the markets are saying a different thing, but I have to imagine AMD is going to come out swinging in the next couple of years. Like I feel like the 2025 thing is like NVIDIA is just a unstoppable, untouchable entity. And if you just zoom out long enough and look at other technological revolutions, like Ford obviously was a massive car manufacturer and it kind of dominated, right? But other car companies came along and built up capacity pretty quickly. And I feel like, I have a lot of love for NVIDIA. I've been building computers, for 20 years since I was a kid in a basement. Like NVIDIA is something I love as a brand, but like, AMD, I feel like is gonna come. And there might even be others that join this kind of race. But I think the biggest thing of 2025 is people thinking NVIDIA for the next 10 years is unstoppable. Nothing is gonna, keep them from being the kind of 90% shareholder. I think there's a lot to be said over the next couple of years that AMD is going to come in and do a lot of damage.
Yeah. I think mine would be AGM and superintelligence. I already said it earlier. I think it's a little bit of a fool's errand. I don't know, and it is a marketing term. I do respect like what Demis and his team at DeepMind are trying to do, which is build what I think of as just like a really much smarter version of AI that can do things that are even really challenging for humans to do. But and it's funny because a conversation we had, Rob, made me think about this because I think it's a good example. You talked about when you think about models, think about people. Think about take the smartest person like you don't go to them for everything, right? You don't go to them to ask like if you said Stephen Wolfram, I think was the smartest person you ever met. And but you wouldn't go to him to ask like, who do you think is going to win the Heisman, this year? You wouldn't ask him,
wouldn't hire him to do my basic accounting.
Exactly. Yeah. So models are kind of like that. And even I think the way we think of like super intelligent models, I think one model to rule them all, I think that idea has kind of been poo-pooed in 2025, that shouldn't be the end goal and it's not the best use of resources. And so I wonder if all this conversation around superintelligence and AGM starts to shift and we go, you know what, that maybe wasn't even the best path. Maybe that's not the right path to think about it, because domains in some ways need specific knowledge, and not sort of one thing to know everything.
Yeah, there are cases like tax law, right, where whether somebody's smart or not, like you just need somebody that studied it and has expertise in it. And I think for mine, I mean, OpenAI is never going to sponsor this podcast because I'm like such a hater. But
maybe they will.
Maybe they'll be like,
maybe they need to. So,
I just think they're overextended. I think they're doing too many things. I think they're unfocused. I mean, they're launching a browser, and like I get why they're doing it. They're trying to like boil the ocean and have their hooks and everything and be too big to fail. But like, it's even at that size, we're like, if I talk to my friends that work at Google, they still have capital constraints. Like they still don't have all the money to do everything they would like to do, and they're still prioritizing things. And I feel like OpenAI is not prioritizing things. And I think no matter what size of a company you are, you always have to do that.
That's why they're not public.
Yeah, you can prioritize more things when you're bigger and you have more business lines and all that. But I just think they're struggling with focus. And I like, if I was running that company, I would probably actually stop fighting the model game and I would focus on user-focused consumer AI. I think that's where they've built a great brand, and that's what I would lean into. I think that's their real asset. I don't think it's they need to win the model game. I think they just need to be, in that conversation. But I don't think. But I think they want to win in multiple games, and man, that's hard.
Yeah,
that's really hard, particularly when you're private and you're small and you don't have a lot of assets.
Consumers don't, I think, completely understand all the things that AI can do. And the thing is, if they are really trying to become a consumer AI company, and that's where I think it's challenged, because essentially you're going to have to go up against Apple. You're going to have to go up against Samsung, even.
Yeah.
You're going to have to eventually go up against Google, which has a great, consumer brand. As you're talking about, like, there's so much trust. Consumer brands are ultimately about trust. Like, who do you trust with your data, with your,
So much marketing has to go into that, right? It's the whole, like, you have to see a brand 7 times before you even like have an open conversation with them, right? Something of that advertising. And, we got to imagine 2026 will bring better names to this whole AI kind of domain. Like, what is going on? Obviously, ChatGPT was made fun of so much about like the naming conventions with all their different models. Claude Code got a lot of like, hey, like what's going on with Claude? I understand the purpose behind it. It's a great, shout out to vendor. But I have to imagine we'll get better names over the years, right? Like, it's coming.
And ChatGPT and Claude. It's fair.
I don't even like Gemini, to be honest.
Yeah. Gemini is essentially because like Gemini is twins, and it's like Google and DeepView, DeepMind coming together.
Yeah.
And so I made the opposite mistake you made at the beginning.
No, it's funny. It's funny. Yeah, I think they all have clever underpinnings. Don't get me wrong, but like, if you're going to be a consumer, it's got to be a little catchier.
Yeah.
We got a question teed up for you, like we do for all guests. New York centric, question. What is your least favorite tourist attraction here in the city?
I love the question because there are a lot of tourist traps in New York.
So many. Sometimes they even have people outside the tourist attraction that's free to go to, asking you to pay $10. I've seen so many homeless people doing that, and it's actually really clever, right? But that just shows you how many tourist attractions and traps there are.
Yeah.
What is the worst one?
It's true. If I can start with some of the ones that I thought would be the worst ones that end up being the best. One of the ones that's always given as the worst is the Statue of Liberty. And I've only been one time. I went once with my daughter, and I was like, I'm sort of ashamed to say how much fun this was. Like, it's great to walk around, like amazing view of the city, like all of that. So that was the one that I hear the most. I hear New Yorkers tell me like proudly when they like lived in New York for 10 years and then they leave, they're like, I lived here for 10 years. I never went to the Statue of Liberty one time.
Yeah. I think the Statue of Liberty is really cool. I love the Statue of Liberty. So I'm sorry it got so much hate, but I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, I do. I like that one. Same thing with Central Park. Like Central Park also gets a bunch of hate.
Yeah.
It's all incredible, right?
Yeah.
The other one maybe on the list that I think maybe is deservedly is a little Times Square.
That would be mine.
So crowded. You sort of feel like you're trying to get fleeced. Every step you take. There. And so I think the theaters there are amazing. I've been to some of the theaters. I got to see Hamilton. I got to see Lion King with my family, and like they're incredible. But having to navigate through Times Square. And like
brutal. Middle of summer, it's brutal.
Oh, it's rough. And then you think about some of the world's most valuable real estate, right? For like commercial real estate.
Yeah.
And what are the brands that are there? It's all the brands that are like everywhere throughout America, right?
Yeah.
Like all of the franchise stuff. And it's like, why would you, like, there's so many unique, awesome New York franchises in food and shopping and all of that. But instead of them being in Times Square, like they're all the other places in New York. And so instead you get the same thing. It's like, if you came
there's
to New
an
York
Olive Garden, there's a Red Lobster,
exactly.
there's an Applebee's.
Even a Margaritaville.
Exactly. You've hit all of it. So why would you come to New York and go to those things? Like
because you can pay double the price here, you know?
Exactly. So I think of that as like probably, the one that I sort of makes me, sad that people come all the way to New York.
It's funny because we were chatting right before the show about it, and like we both agreed it was Times Square too. So it's funny hearing you double down. Like it's rare that all three people on the show have the same one.
When you live here, you don't go through Times Square unless you have to. Like you go to a Broadway show and you have to like get off at 42nd Street or
as someone that's a fast walker to like the death of me, it's really hard to be in Times Square. I'm just like constantly like, oh my gosh, like I'd almost rather be in traffic, and I hate driving. So that says a lot about Times Square.
Yeah, for 5 years, our office, the office I worked out of was at 15th and 5th. So it was down, near NYU.
Yeah,
And I
right
really,
downtown.
for most of my career, had spent most of my career either in Lower Manhattan or Midtown.
Yeah.
And when I had those 5 years where I was there, for those 5 years, I never came to Midtown or Times Square,
Yeah.
except unless I had a meeting, but most of the meetings were never around Times Square. And I realized there's so much of New York that's so, amazing sort of outside of that, and loved it and was so impressed, by it. Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on the show, man. This was really fun.
My
yeah,
pleasure.
definitely.
Great
And if you're not subscribed to The Deep View, go to thedeepview.com.
That's right. Or subscribe at thedeepview.com is a really easy way to just drop your email.
TheDeep. So that's how it starts.
That's right.
Yeah, check it out. And hope you guys enjoyed the show. Go watch the other episodes and have a happy new year. We'll see you in 2026.